All right, let's. We're going to look at the large intestine now, and we'll also say a little bit about the blood vascular system. So, small intestine, the ileum, that is, all right, ends over here in the lower right quadrant. Right, in the lower right quadrant. Here's the lower right quadrant, and it empties through a valve called the ileocecal valve. Very good. The ileocecal valve, of course, is where the ileum joins into this sort of open sac at the very beginning of the large intestine called the cecum. All right. Our cecum isn't very big. Our little vermiform appendix extends off of that. All right. There's your appendix. All right. Lower right quadrant. All right. In some creatures, this is much bigger, and it's loaded with bacteria, and it allows them to digest cellulose, like in rats. Okay, this is a great big bag. All right, but in humans, it's nothing real impressive, and it gives rise then to your colon. All right, and your colon has a length of about 1.5 meters, so it's 25% of the length in comparison to your small intestine, all right, 1.5 meters versus 6 meters, all right, and if we follow that, the course of it, it forms a frame, doesn't it? A frame on 3 sides, all right, the ascending colon going up the right side, if you will, all right, the transverse colon, the descending colon, and then the sigmoid colon, which ends here at the rectum, all right. So there's the components. We've got ascending. This quick turn here, all right, this is called the hepatic flexure, all right, the hepatic flexure, all right, sometimes it's called the right flexure as well, all right, the hepatic flexure because it's near where your liver sits, all right, and then we go across transverse here, and this is called the, what do you think? What organ is over here? Your spleen. So it's the splenic flexure. Splenic flexure. And then we have the descending and then the sigmoid colon. And if you look up here, then I've laid out the roadmap here. The cecum and then ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon, rectum. And the convenient thing here that I hadn't thought about until I was reviewing these earlier today is the ascending colon is retroperitoneal. The transverse is intraperitoneal. Descending is retro. Sigmoid is intra. Rectum is retro. So how easy is that? It just alternates. Retro, intra, retro, intra, retro, intra. All right? So that makes it pretty easy to remember that. All right? Alternatively, think about, again, the ascending and descending are retroperitoneal. And what do you know attaches to the transverse and sigmoid? A mesocolon, right? A mesocolon. That is a mesentery, all right? And so these must be intraperitoneal, right? The transverse and the sigmoid must be intraperitoneal because they have a mesocolon. Okay, are we good? All right. And they are retroperitoneal. So they're sitting behind the parietal peritoneum. So they're right up against that body wall, all right? So they do not have a mesentery or mesocolon, all right? Okay. A quick word about the appendix, all right? We have always said that the appendix has no function in humans. It's just a vestigial structure, all right? And people still sort of adhere to that, but new science says not so fast. You can live without it. If it gets infected, they can take it out and you're not impaired in any way. But it may be that your appendix keeps a small culture of bacteria, all right, so that in the event that you have a bout of diarrhea that completely removes your normal flora, because, of course, I have not mentioned this, but the large intestine has its own population of bacteria, all right, that facilitate digestion of some of your food and provide you with things like vitamin K, all right, and certain amino acids. You have to have those bacteria in your gut, all right? And these days, what do people get if their bacterial, their microbial flora in their gut is diminished? What are you hearing about in the news these days? C. difficilans, right? C. difficile. Clostridium difficile, who's heard of that? You will hear about it, all right? And it's killing people, all right? And this is just an opportunistic bacterium that people, that's antibiotic resistant, and people are dying from it, all right? And this'll surprise you. You know what the most successful treatment for that is? A fecal transplant. All right, a fecal transplant. And what they do is, let's say you've got an old couple living in their apartment, and one of them comes down with Clostridium difficile. All right, for some reason they had a flu and they lost all their bacteria, and then this one becomes opportunistic. It takes over in the gut and it will kill you. And it's resistant to antibiotics. And the treatment that they found is get some feces from the mate, introduce it into the gut, and you introduce the culture of bacteria that they are accustomed to because they live together and they eat the same foods and they're, in the same space, all right? It's pretty amazing.
Introduce is a nice word. How do they get it in there?
Guess.
No.
They just go through the closest opening, all right? So they just go right up through the anus, up into the rectum, and I don't know how far into the I would presume they don't have to go beyond the sigmoid colon, all right? But they just literally introduce that, all right? And as a small amount, all right? Just a small amount. It's just a culture. It's a seed culture, right? And that's what your appendix does that for you, all right? It retains a little bit of bacteria and it protects you in that way. Yeah.
Why not just probiotics? Why all of that?
It just doesn't seem that, I know everybody's into that. No, it doesn't seem that probiotics are giving you that balance that you need to sort of protect and provide an ecosystem that keeps these other guys at bay. All right, and so they've tried that, and they try antibiotic therapies, and people don't respond. And literally, the person who thought of this fecal transplant, they were at their wits' end. Patient was going to die, so why not? Let's try this. All right, and amazingly, it worked.
So are you saying that this is coming about more because people are trying to keep their bacteria low?
No, it's just one of these things. Just as you have all of a sudden a group of bacteria that become very popular. All right, and this happens to be the bacteria de jour, all right, and it's really unfortunate and it's very serious because it's antibiotic resistant. Okay, all right. A weird anatomy here as we look at a cross section of the gut, or if we were to look at a cross section of the gut, is that our inner circular, outer longitudinal takes on a slightly different appearance, and that is the inner circular in the muscularis externa is as it should be. All right, a nice circular cylinder of muscle that's running the length of the large intestine. But the outer longitudinal layer does not cover the full, shall we say, circumference of this tube. Instead, it's gathered up into three long ribbons, all right, called the Tenia coli, all right, and Tenia means ribbon. Yeah. So three long ribbons, and you see them here, and they are ribbons that are sort of gathering it up. So if you think about the ribbons being a little too short for the length of the intestine, and so you have to gather it up into these, into what are called the Haustra, all right? And the Haustra are simply these pouches. There's a good name for them. These little pouches along the length of the gut, all right? And it is the combined action of these two muscle layers, although a little bit different than what you've seen, that allows for the various movements of the large intestine. It isn't limited to peristaltic, although it's capable of peristaltic, it's capable of segmentation, and it's also capable of what's called a rolling motion, which is just sort of the big movement of material in the colon that happens a few times in your day, all right, usually sometime around mealtime. All right, and that's called a rolling movement. All right, and it's a mass movement of material. All right, real quick circulation here. If we think about, we'll just use this as a symbology for the digestive tract, all right, and even here we'll give it even a little bit of small intestine here, all right. I don't want to get crazy because this is the important part, all right. If we think about the descending here's your heart. Here's your aorta. Okay? Here's the diaphragm. Are we all okay with that? We're picking up here. All right? So there it is. All right? And that's your descending aorta. And it bifurcates as it sends branches that eventually send blood down into your legs. Okay? We're okay with that? So here's the diaphragm up here. And the first trunk that comes out is called the celiac trunk. All right, and it has 3 branches that branch out of it immediately. All right, one is the hepatic branch. One is, so we'll call it the hepatic artery. One is the gastric that's going to the stomach. And one is the splenic. All right, these are the 3 arteries that come off of the celiac trunk, the very first vessel that emerges from the descending aorta as it has just penetrated the diaphragm. All right. We go down a little bit further, and we have another vessel here. This is the one I really wanted to sort of talk about. All right. And this next vessel is called the superior mesenteric. And think of that name. All right, superior, of course, means it's the one that's higher up, and if there's a superior, you know there's going to be an inferior, and we'll just sketch it in here. All right, this is the renal arteries and veins, or renal arteries rather. All right, there's the renal arteries, which we don't care about today, and just below that is the inferior mesenteric. Okay, superior mesenteric is going to supply the entire intestine except the descending colon and beyond. All right, so descending sigmoid rectum, that's all off of the inferior. But once you get past the stomach, the superior mesenteric is supplying all of the small intestine, the ascending and transverse colon. All right? So when you look, the reason I mention that is when you looked at that mesentery, and it's carrying out when you looked at it. I didn't shoot. Have you seen it? Okay. And you see the radial arteries all coming out like the spokes of a wheel. All right. They are all branches off of the superior mesenteric artery. All right. You probably knew that. You hadn't learned that. Well, good. I'm glad we did that then. All right. So the superior mesenteric comes out. All right. And then it starts sending out branches, literally that are going out, and all these branches are being carried in the mesentery. Okay, so that's superior mesenteric. And here you see branches of it then in this figure, all right, even though this is just showing the large intestine. Small intestine, same deal. All right, if we were to take a big coil of small intestine then, all right, and just sort of splay it out, all right, this is a big coil of small intestine, we would see this. All right, and these are the radial arteries, and this is a branch off the superior mesenteric. Okay, all right, and these are all traveling in the mesentery. Okay, good, all right. Let's keep going here. All right, large intestine ends at the sigmoid colon. And then we arrive at the rectum. Again, we made mention about bacteria are part of your natural flora. You don't want to have bacteria in your small intestine. You don't want to have bacteria in your stomach. All right, but it's permissible. It's essential to have bacteria in your large intestine. All right, and we've said then those bacteria produce certain essential things like vitamin K, a vitamin you need for blood clotting. All right, also certain amino acids. Your colon has another function, which is to absorb water and salts. All right? And you know how much water, because when you have diarrhea, you're amazed at how much liquid passes through you. All right? normally that liquid is being reabsorbed across the wall of the gut, across the large intestine, put back into the blood circulation, all right, as well as the salts. In fact, the salts are transported across and the water follows osmotically. Okay, so the salts are transported across the wall of the large intestine and the water follows osmotically, and so you're reabsorbing that all that water. And as you reabsorb that water, what's happening to the undigestibles? They are forming your solid wastes, all right? And those solid wastes come to rest in the rectum, all right? And the rectum is this sac here that's capable of expanding, all right? It has these rectal valves which are essentially to prevent sort of the free movement of fecal matter. It means that gas can be passed without an accident, shall we say, all right? And, of course, the rectum is retroperitoneal and extends all the way down to the anal canal here. And once we get down to the anal canal, we arrive at the anus, all right? And the anus is composed of two sphincters, all right? Two sphincters, all right? Part of the inner circular layer is built up to form the inner sphincter, all right? The internal anal sphincter, all right, is made from smooth muscle. It is a thickening of the inner circular. That makes sense, right? Circular, so it's going to be able to close off, all right? And that is closed. It's kept closed. And it relaxes under stimulation by your parasympathetic, all right? The rest and rumination, all right? Okay. And what do you think sympathetic does to that? Sympathetic tightens it up, right? Sympathetic. If you're in fight or flight, you probably aren't going to be thinking about going to the bathroom, okay? You have two sphincters, all right? One is the internal, and it's smooth muscle then. The other, the external anal sphincter, is just part of the pelvic floor, all right? It's skeletal muscle. And, of course, then it is voluntary then, all right? And we've all experienced that window of time when the internal sphincter has decided to relax, right? And you're just relying on the voluntary external sphincter, all right? I think you got that? Okay? All right. There's one more thing I wanted to show you back here that I didn't mention and is worth talking about. It's illustrated in this image here, all right? And I'll mention it here, but recognize that these are also found throughout the small intestine and throughout the large intestine, all right? This is called a lymphatic nodule, all right? And it is just an aggregate of white blood cells that sits in the mucosa, all right, in the lamina propria. And you think about your gut, all right? There's a large propensity for infection to move across the wall of the gut, all right, if things aren't just right, all right? And so you want to have a whole bunch of white blood cell defenders there just in case, all right? And so you have these lymphatic nodules, which are just big clusters of white blood cells. I think there was another image somewhere. Here, you see one here as well, all right? And you see one here. And they are part of your body's defense system that in total we call it the GULT, G-A-L-T, which stands for gut-associated lymphatic tissues, all right? Gut-associated lymphatic tissues. And these are the white blood cell populations that are protecting you, all right, from any kind of infection that might occur or might arise as a breach across the wall of the gut. Okay? Okay. let's go back to the small intestine one more time. All right. We said that the jejunum sort of is the textbook small intestine because it's got the folds and it's got the villi, and of course it's got the microvilli too. All right. As we get down to the ileum, you have fewer villi and the folds disappear. Okay. And so when we get into the large intestine, apart from the Haustra that we just talked about, there are no folds, there aren't those little ridges, and there are no villi. There are no villi, no little finger-like projections. All right? There are no villi. Microvilli, yes, because we're going to absorb fluid, but there are no villi. All right, that intermediate sort of surface area component, those don't exist in the large intestine. All right, no villi in the large intestine. All right. And, of course, a lot of mucus, production of mucus in the large intestine as well, and you can understand why, especially as you get further and further downstream of the large intestine, as solid waste or as your wastes start to become solid, you want to be sure that that surface is being lubricated. All right, this is just very quickly here an X-ray of a barium X-ray showing you the large intestine, and this person has a condition called diverticulitis, all right? And diverticula are outpocketings, finger-like outpocketings. They're most common in the sigmoid colon, and the reason is because that is the part of the large intestine with the smallest diameter, and so it's the part of the large intestine, again, part of the large intestine with the smallest diameter, and therefore it's subject to the highest intraluminal pressure. All right? And that intraluminal pressure tends to create, in some individuals, these little outpocketings. All right? And if these outpocketings tend to harbor infection, then you have diverticulitis. All right? And so some people don't have infection there, and it's just diverticulosis. They have the outpocketings, but there's no infection, there's no inflammation associated with it, all right? But there's risk, of course. And if you have infection in those outpocketings, it becomes very serious and very painful, a lot of abdominal pain, all right, on the left lower quadrant of the abdomen, all right, associated with that. Okay? All right. Let's shift gears and say a little bit about the pancreas and maybe even something about my friend the liver. Right, an organ I spent way too many years working on in my graduate school work. So the pancreas, where did we say it sits? Sits in the hook of the duodenum, right? There's the duodenum right there, and there sits the pancreas, and it's sort of, I always say it's the shape of a carrot. All right, I don't know if that's good or not, but we call this portion the head, all right, and then the body, and then the most distal part, the tail. All right, and this is an organ that is got two functions, right? It's mixed functions. It is both endocrine and exocrine. All right, let's talk about the exocrine first because we've been talking about food digestion. Your pancreas secretes bicarbonate, which is intended to neutralize stomach acids. And so what did we say? It goes into the duodenal papilla, right? It drains into the duodenal papilla. So as stomach contents go through the pyloric sphincter, they are acidy, they're coming into the duodenum, and right there waiting in the duodenum is bicarbonate to neutralize the acid, to bring the pH up to pH 8, all right, so that the other components of the pancreatic secretions, namely various enzymes, are able to be active, all right? And among those enzymes, pancreatic amylase to break down carbohydrates, all right, trypsin and chymotrypsin, if you've heard of any of those, all right, those are intended to break down proteins, all right, to finish the job that was started in the stomach. We talked about breaking down protein in the stomach, all right, with pepsin. These finish that job. So you have an exocrine component, which is 99% of the tissues of the pancreas, all right, 99% are exocrine. So all these dark staining cells in this histological section, all these dark staining cells are pancreatic acini. And an acinus is simply, at the microscopic level, an acinus is simply a duct, all right, with the cells that are clustered around that duct, all right, which is to say, there they are, all right. These are the pancreatic acinar cells, and they are producing the enzymes, all right, that make up the pancreatic juice, and then the duct itself is responsible for producing the bicarbonate. All right, so the enzymes are coming from the acinar cells. This whole thing is called an acinus. All right, and these are acinar cells. All right, that is the exocrine part of the pancreas. And if this is one functional unit, microscopic, can you then go on to imagine this branching and there being another here, all right, with all of its cells opening up into this duct? All right, so this is exocrine again, right? And the whole 99% of the pancreas is made up of these acini, all with ducts producing bicarbonate, all converging onto one another to eventually form the main pancreatic duct, which runs down right down the middle of the organ. All right, there it is, the main pancreatic duct, all right, running down the middle of the organ. And eventually it drains into the hepatopancreatic, because we're going to share something with the liver here, hepatopancreatic ampulla, a little swelling in the duct there, and that opens up into the duodenal papilla, the opening that goes into the duodenum to drain the pancreas. Okay? The other function of the pancreas is found in these little tiny islands of tissue. All right? These are called the islets of Langerhans. All right? And if you've ever been to the islands of Langerhans, you'll notice there are no ducts there. Oh, no, that's not what I want to tell you. There are no ducts on the islets of Langerhans, okay? All right, there are no ducts, okay, because it is endocrine. You were thinking about islands with ducts now. Get your minds off of that. All right, yes, it is endocrine, all right? And among the hormones that it secretes is insulin to lower your blood sugar and glucagon to raise your blood sugar. All right? If you 1% of the tissue. If you look at a histological section, it's a landscape of darkly staining acinar cells with a little tiny island here and there of light staining islet cells. All right? They're called alpha and beta cells, all right, that form the islets. All right? They're really tiny amount because it's endocrine and it doesn't take a lot of hormone to do a lot of heavy lifting, right? So, in a diabetic, a type 1 diabetic, insulin-dependent diabetic, their immune system has destroyed the islets, all right, or the beta cells within the islets. The islets are still there, but they just contain the alpha cells and one or two other cell types, all right? But the beta cells, the cells responsible for producing insulin within the islets of Langerhans, are gone. Amazing, all right? Amazing. So, there's the pancreas. Sitting in the hook, retroperitoneal. All right? Okay. Let me say a word about the liver, and we'll come back because I don't want to be hasty about this image, which is more or less getting towards the last in the series here, and we'll finish this up on Tuesday. But gross anatomy of the liver, because we've been talking about this here. Let me show you one thing. We've got the intestine here, all right? And I've shown you the superior mesenteric artery supplying blood, and eventually that blood goes to the villi, right? And those capillaries drain back into veins, right? Those veins, which are now carrying all of the absorbed nutrition, right? The gut, those veins all go to the liver before they see any other part of the body. All right? Everything absorbed from the digestive tract converges on a vein that drains the intestine. All right? So all of these, there's veins now. All right? So we're draining all that, and it all converges on a vein called the hepatic portal vein. And let's get a liver up here real quick. There's a liver, okay? All right, we're not going to get fancy here. There's our liver, all right? And the hepatic portal vein is going to carry 80% of the blood supply into the liver, all right? 80% of the blood supply, of the volume of blood going into the liver, is coming from the hepatic portal vein. Let's do two things here. A portal vein, there's a new term, all right? A portal vein, by definition, what do you know about veins? Veins begin at a capillary bed, right, as they drain it. Veins begin at a capillary bed, and they return to the heart, right, and drain into the heart. Portal veins don't. Portal veins begin at the capillary bed, drain a tissue, and empty into a second capillary bed. So portal veins are like a bridge between capillary beds. And so the hepatic portal vein in the capillaries of the gut and drains into the capillaries that supply the liver so that it can scrutinize everything that's in the food you eat. All right? When you think about all the bad stuff in the food you eat, all right, the food colorings and the whatevers, all right, the pesticides and all that, as well as the good stuff, all right, it all goes to the liver first. The liver can pick up the excess stuff, all the sugar. It wants to save some for later. You don't get it all right now, all right? Save some for later when you haven't eaten. Remove those toxic materials and detoxify them. Collect those vitamins and store them away. All of those things are functions that are happening in this organ. As it receives, it gets the first crack at the blood coming from the gut. All right? But the organ also needs arterial blood. And so the other 20% going into the organ is from the hepatic artery. Have we talked about the hepatic artery today? Yes, coming off the celiac trunk. All right, and then the organ is going to drain via the hepatic vein. No, just the hepatic vein, and this is the inferior vena cava. All right. I'm going to show you one last thing. All right. So we complete the package. What the package is in a sec. All right. So we have blood coming into the liver. 80% coming from the gut as a hepatic portal blood, low in oxygen, rich in everything else that was absorbed from the gut, right? And 20% coming from off the celiac trunk, arterial blood, supplying the organ with the oxygen it's going to need to do all the work it's going to have to be doing here. All right? And once that blood is processed by the organ, it drains out of the organ through the hepatic vein, not to be confused with the portal vein, hepatic vein, which goes into the big drainage system, the inferior vena cava. All right? Now, your liver also produces bile, and it has this little, vessel here, the gallbladder, which stores that bile, all right, and eventually drains it, as we said, into the duodenum, right? All right, via the hepatopancreatic ampulla, all right? And so what I want to show you here then, to finish up, is that we've got hepatic portal blood and arterial blood coming into the organ, and we've got bile draining in the opposite direction. All right? Okay? You've got two vascular supplies to the organ, and you've got an exocrine, drainage of bile. And the reason I'm making such a big deal out of it is that next time, when we look at the functional unit of the liver, the microscopic lowest common denominator, of the liver, you're going to see those exact same components. You're going to see a branch of the hepatic portal vein. You're going to see branches of the hepatic artery. You're going to see a little drainage going in the opposite direction for bile. And you're going to see a venous drainage out of that little unit, a branch that leads to the hepatic vein. So what you've just seen macroscopically in the gross anatomy is going to be repeated at a very fine level within each of the microscopic functional units, the liver lobules, all right? And we'll look at those next time.